Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to Slam, the podcast that reviews every single DC superhero comic book ever. Well, at least superhero ever. I'm your co-host Mike Allen. As always, I'm joined by
Joshua Mervell, and today we're taking a look at some of the origins of Dr. Fate.
That's right, and to celebrate, we have Dr. Fate aficionado Paul Carbonaro joining us. Thank you, Paul.
That's a very generous title.
So I believe you did say you were interested in Dr. Fate. Am I wrong about that?
I am interested for 50% good reasons and 50% bad.
What are the 50-50s? Tell us.
Yeah, when you have mystical stuff, it's very easy to feel detached from a character, I think. And so a great aspect of Doctor Strange is that you see his face. And you know that in the late 60s, when they were trying to boost or make him more superheroic, they covered his face. And it just became kind of blank. And it doesn't work. You need to see the face, and then you feel like you can get the emotions better, which is a strange thing to say because other characters have their faces covered, like Spider-Man, for example, but this is mystical stuff. And so Dr. Fate has a very sound reason for the helmet, but that's it for me. The helmet. Sorry, I can't see your face.
So I take it you're not a fan of people like Boba Fett then, are you?
Absolutely not.
Oh boy. Okay. We're not on the same page there then. But anyway, okay, you know what? We're going to jump into this one. We're going to try and wrap this sucker up in the next 27 minutes, I think.
Okay.
So we're going to get through this pretty quickly. Someone's outside stealing my recycle bottles. But anyway, okay, so we're going to start off. This is actually not the first appearance of Dr. Fate we're going to talk about first. This is the origin, which again strangely came a few issues later. So his first appearance was in More Fun Comics number 55, but we're going to talk about More Fun Comics number
67?
67, yep. Just going to open these up here so I can see them.
Sure.
So basically, and you know, I got to say, I'm surprised I'd never read this before, but basically we're introduced to Kent Nelson as a young boy, like a 10-year-old boy or something, and he's exploring Egypt with his father. And basically his father theorizes that the pyramids were built by aliens. And, you know, I guess I thought Von Däniken invented that theory, but I guess it was this guy, this comic book anyway. So he comes up with this theory, and so they're going to investigate the pyramids. And basically they go deep exploring about 2 feet into the entrance, and they come across this statue that no one's ever seen before. And it's is this... Help me out, Paul. Is this Anubis here, or who is this? This guy. This is Naboo, right?
Yeah, I think that's correct.
Yeah. So then Naboo comes down. He's like a statue, but then he kind of comes to life. And this is so ridiculous that it's funny. Basically, he comes down and he starts talking to the son, and then all of a sudden the son turns around. He's like, "Dad, oh my golly, he's sick." And then the guy says, "Oh, he's dead. Come back, Dad, come back." Well, when these chambers were built, a poison gas was prepared so that anyone who knew not the secret of the chamber was sure to die. And I thought, oh, maybe the guy will revive his dad. Nope, the father's dead. So then they show him at his grave, and then the guy basically takes him under his wing, and all of a sudden now it jumps ahead to years later, and now Kent Nelson is a full-grown adult, and this guy, Naboo the Wise, has taught him these tricks. Like he's showing him like levitating. He's showing Kent Nelson levitating objects like rocks, right? Mm-hmm. And then that's it. He's like, okay, here you go. Here's your costume. Go and fight crime. Okay. So then he leaves, and then it's like years later at a New York dinner party. So we actually got some funky art here, but we see some bad guys, or just some guys. They're not bad guys. We don't know that yet. But I actually just read this, and I have no idea what happens next. I can't remember, but they're because I have to actually read the bubbles, because we should point out Golden Age art does not really tell a story. It's just pictures of people talking. So it's not like the classic John Buscema, Marvel style, where you can see the action that's going on. So that's why I have such a hard time reiterating what happened here. But basically, he's at this thing, and what happens? They leave. Why do they leave?
He essentially is like, hey, I need your help because there's this place that's haunted by ghosts.
Oh.
So they go together to the
house.
He leaves, and then Kent is like, I've got an idea. I'm gonna go there as Dr. Fate and get rid of all these ghosts. So he shows up.
He flies there in his street clothes.
Yeah, he does fly there in his street clothes. You're right. And then he gets changed, assumingly, in the front lawn. And he bursts in and he starts essentially berating this ghost and chases him back to hell? Where he... and the lady wants to go with him, so she goes for some reason. And essentially he just talks to the Lord of the Underworld, Ngal, and says that, like, listen, dude, you better keep these ghosts down here in hell, or else I'm going to come back down here and I'm going to beat the crap out of you. He's like, okay, deal, sounds good. And then that's the end of the comic, yeah.
So I'm going to say a pretty... I mean, I do like the Egyptian stuff, but they could have been a lot more creative with that. It's kind of just an excuse to get Dr. Fate going. It's obviously... there's not as much creativity here as there was later on with Doctor Strange, which was by Steve Ditko and Stan Lee. But I still do appreciate what they're trying to do. I love Dr. Fate's costume. I always have. I love the fact that you can't see his face. Makes him so mysterious. But Paul, what did you think of this original origin of Dr. Fate?
I thought the same as you just said, both of you.
Okay.
Whatever you just said, and I certainly heard it. I agree completely. I don't think there's anything to add to what you said.
What, did you have a hard time hearing us?
No, it's just
joking?
it's what you expect kind of from the golden age, right?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, sometimes you might get a little bit more than what you just described, but it's not often. I mean, we have to take it for what it is. It's all right. It's exactly as you said, meaning it's to get Dr. Fate going, and that's it. Just get it going.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, the origin is a little goofy. The art as well as janky at times. Some of the background characters look the exact same. I mean, even Kent and his father look identical. Like, it looks like they're two clones talking to each other because they didn't differentiate him as being a boy compared to his father. It's almost like they wrote it in afterwards that he went there with his like young boy and then he was there for years training, and it was originally just like a father and a son going on an expedition together as an adult. Well,
and also the father has exactly the same clothes except his pants are green and Kent's pants are blue, but that's the only difference between the two. So
it's fine. It's interesting, I guess, but it's more, I think, promising, like what's to come, right? Like it is kind of setting up this character and setting up the fact that he's like this mystical being that's kind of ingrained, like his history and his powers are ingrained in both like magic and Earth's history, which is very cool. I think that's one thing that Dr. Fate has over Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange is really fun and kind of has the like goes crazy with the mystical arts, but I feel like Dr. Fate always kind of has some sort of weird foot in reality with how it's kind of connected with all of this like mythology, which is really cool. But
I agree. And that develops as they go further. Like, we should point out, this is written by Gardner Fox and drawn by Howard Sherman. And the mythology is expanded on, I believe, with each successive origin. And now we're going to talk about the next one. This isn't really an origin. It's more of like a revamp of a character. The character was brought back, if everyone remembers, in Showcase, the issue we reviewed in our last, I think it was our last episode or 2 episodes ago, where he came back at the same time as Iron Man. So that was his Silver Age revival. It was the original character brought back instead of rebooted. But in the 1970s, they kind of decided to revamp the character a little bit and, add a little bit to his backstory. So Josh is going to tell us about first. This is a confusing title. First issue special number 9. So let's talk about that one.
Right. This one is the Master of Magic battles the mummy that time forgot. So we see Dr. Fate kind of flying around, looking at different things. He goes over to the Boston Museum of Egyptology, where he senses some sort of disturbance. Some of the people at the museum there are talking, and the sarcophagus kind of creeps open behind them, and it is this mummy named Nabu Callus, right? Nabu is the helmet.
Nabu is the guy, is the spirit that gave Dr. Fate his powers and trained him,
right?
Or whatever.
So in that spirit is kind of like inhabited inside of the helmet. So when he puts that on, that's why he kind of has like dual personalities. Like he's a different person when he is Dr. Fate. He's not Kent any longer. So we get this battle between Dr. Fate and this mummy named Callus as they're kind of beating each other up. But unfortunately, Dr. Fate is overpowered because the power that the amulet that gives him power also gives Callus power, and Callus is feeding off the amulet, so he's not as strong as he normally is. And while he's down, Callus rips the amulet from him. So now Dr. Fate has to wake up and figure out what to do about this situation. He goes home to his wife, and she is not really impressed with everything that's going on. She's kind of having to constantly help him out and cover for him and be his personal doctor. But she never really knows who he's talking to. So there's some conflict there because, again, he kind of has like 2 different personalities. And she does want to help. So after he kind of like faints from exhaustion, she decides to kind of take things into her own hands and leaves. He ends up waking up some time later, and he does some research, and this is where we get the backstory of Callus. And we learn that he was a ruthless ruler back in ancient Egypt, and he used this amulet the amulet of Anubis, to force slaves to build the pyramids for him. And then finally one day these Egyptian slaves kind of overtook him and overthrew him.
They called him Nubian, which is ridiculous, but whatever.
Nubian,
we'll talk about that later, yeah.
And because of that, it essentially put a curse on him where he cannot die until he grabs the amulet and returns it to Anubis. So that's why years later he was actually awoken and has kind of escaped and is on the lookout for this amulet. So after Dr. Fate learns this, he kind of is reminded of his origin, and again we see the same we see the same origin where he is in ancient Egypt with his father. He releases this being that gives him these powers and trains him. The gas again kills his father, but not him for some strange reason. And then we cut away to Dr. Fate putting on his costume and realizing he needs to go fight Callus once and for all. Meanwhile, we see the wife is also kind of like looking around and decides to head to the museum because she thinks that's probably the first place she should look. Dr. Fate ends up catching up to the bad guy. He starts like attacking him. He saves up all of his power and does one final blast at Callus, but it doesn't really work. He ends up running away. All while his wife shows up and explains that she found this piece of a seal to his coffin, and it has an inscription on it that can destroy him. So now we have a way to defeat this guy. Callus has now summoned the pyramids and a giant sphinx in the skyline of Boston. I'm assuming we're still in Boston with the whole museum and everything.
I think so, yeah.
And Anubis is in the clouds. It's kind of this cool fight. Dr. Fate shows up with this piece, and he actually is able to summon the power of Ra, I believe it was. Amun-Ra, the sun god, and ends up destroying Callus and grabbing the amulet and sending Anubis back to the spirit realm or wherever he's from. Once getting it, he kind of collapses, and once again, his wife kind of shows up to help him out and save the day and, pick him up, bring him back home. It's an interesting origin, I think, like recap of the origin, and I think a better way to tell the story and how he's connected with these ancient gods and using mystical arts and whatnot. I quite enjoyed this one, actually.
I enjoyed it too. I'm not always a huge fan of Martin Pasko, but he wrote this one. He's a big Superman writer. I thought that this was really enjoyable. I liked the dialogue between Kent Nelson and his wife. I liked the story, just the way the story was told. I thought it was fine. We have to comment on the art by Walt Simonson, who's famous for doing Thor in the 80s as well as X Factor and some other things. But this is really good art. The whole scene where the god comes is like over Boston with all the pyramids and everything.
So good.
Is like, it's like a blockbuster come to life. It's just ripe to be adapted to a film. I just think it looked incredible. I really like it.
I love how even in that image like Anubis himself almost looks like a hieroglyphic in the sky still. Yes, like it's kind of this like flat 2D image. It's so interesting. Very unique panel.
Great artist. Paul, what do you think?
There's so much I can say, but in a completely different direction. Not negative, but completely different direction from what you guys have been saying. Because the irony for me is that very often, whenever I've written about comics in any form, I've always said how important the writer is to me. As long as the writer is good, I can handle whatever the art is. Like, that's just it. If the art is really good, but the writing isn't, then it doesn't really hold me. So for me, it's always been a bit more about the writer than the artist. And yet many people would claim, no, comics is a very visual medium. It's the artist, not the writer. In this case, for me, it's all about the art. As soon as, you see it's Walt Simonson,
right.
Okay, I don't care what the story is. I don't care. I just want to see the Walt Simonson art. And It's so wonderful for the things you just said. We know, like, Walt Simonson from his Manhunter series. I mean, it hardly gets any better than that. So the story could be good, it could be bad. I hate to say it almost doesn't matter to me because I'm just dazzled by the art. And I believe that when it comes to mystical characters, the great artists love to draw them. So I'm sorry, I'm going to refer to Doctor Strange again here. Because of Doctor Strange, you've got Steve Ditko, Barry Smith, Frank Brunner, Gene Colan, Michael Golden, Marshall Rogers, Jim Starlin. They all love to do this. And so I believe it's the same, with Dr. Fate. If great artists get the chance to draw Dr. Fate, they will. Because I think the mystical aspect really lets them express their artistic creativity. So, like you, Michael, Martin Pasko has never really done it for me. Just hasn't. That's a whole nother story, I guess. So, I'm pretty sure it's a fairly solid story and everything else. But I hate to be a Philistine and say I don't care. I just care about the art, and the art is good.
Yes, very good. I wish we could talk more, but we've only got 10 minutes, and we've got to summarize and review Dr. Fate #1 from 1987. Paul, can you please do the honors? And you can be as brief as you want with a summary.
I'm going to disappoint you again.
Oh, no.
This is a very disappointing, contribution, because this is also interesting for me. So when I saw this, I see the names on the front: Mark DeMatteis, Keith Giffen. Do I enjoy Mark DeMatteis writing? Almost never.
Okay.
The only one I've ever enjoyed of his was Silver Surfer. The Silver Surfer series he did with Ron Garney.
Oh,
I
yes,
followed.
gotcha. Okay.
I followed. Other than that, no. Too horror oriented. I thought he ruined Doctor Strange for me. He ruined the Defenders for me. Even the much revered Craven's Last Hunt is kind of horrific, horror based, coming out of the graveyard and something else. So I didn't get this for Mark DeMatteis. I got it for Keith Giffen, because Keith Giffen was going through a great phase, of just mimicking other styles, doing his own style. And who would not buy this for the art? So I bought it for the art. However, there's a story aspect which I like very much, where they decided that, you know what, we can't have this Kent Nelson guy keep going. So let's say that he's getting too old, his body's getting too old, he's getting worn out, kind of like a Doctor Who character, he's getting worn out, and we need to replace him. And let's not just replace him. Let's be innovative and replace him with two characters in one. And let it not just be two males. Let's make it be a male and a female, and they'll merge to form the essence of Dr. Fate. And when the helmet's on, I believe he's still dominated by Nabu. Is that correct?
Yes.
I do have it. I have my copy down in the basement, and I have reread it and everything. But that's what really struck me. And when these things strike me, they also remind me of something else. So I'd like to quiz the two of you right now.
Okay.
This merging of the male Eric and the female character, what's her name? Do you remember?
Linda Strauss, right?
This merging of Eric and Linda to form the essence of the new Dr. Fate and Kent Nelson exit stage left. What does it remind you of?
Are we talking superheroes, or is it another movie or a book, or
a Marvel comic, a particular character in a Marvel comic in the mid-70s?
Would it be Captain Marvel?
No, it would be Steve Gerber's creation in the Guardians of the Galaxy, Starhawk, who's a of male character and female character.
Yes.
So at one time, suddenly the male character is there, and I always remember the scene when suddenly it wasn't a male character, it was a female character. And that was the first time I had seen that in comics. And I thought, that's great. That's really great. Typically great Steve Gerber. We're not just going to do a merger. We're going to have a merger of male and female. Is this character male or is this character female? So hopefully I'm not saying anything terrible. It's possible that Steve Gerber created the first transgender comic book character.
Or like non-binary, like not, a character that doesn't identify either way. It's pretty interesting. Yeah,
it is. So I was very pleased to see this aspect in the 1987 Dr. Fate, and they completely kind of reboot things where the power level is reduced. I think because with mystical characters it's always possible they can become too powerful, and then it's just too easy to do things. Right. So those were the two main narrative aspects that struck me. The merger of the male and the female, of Eric and Linda, and the rebooting of the powers to kind of scale it down, put limitations on it. Now, in contrast to your, retelling of the mid-70s first issue special story, again, I hate to say it, and I wouldn't blame you if you banned me from future podcasts. I don't really care that much about the story. What I care about is, one, the Keith Giffen art, two, the aspects that I just mentioned. For me, everything else is incidental. Who the character, the kind of monstrous character they come up against, what they have to do, how they have to do it. This is incidental for me, and that's kind of sacrilegious for me to say. So You'll have to forgive me. But as long as Keith Giffen was drawing it, I would get it. No problem.
Well, here's the thing. I think J.M. DeMatteis, I first came upon him because of Craven and because of Justice League International. I always thought he was a great writer. It wasn't until I went back and read his older stuff on Defenders and Marvel Team Up and some other books that I started to think, wow, his early work is pretty terrible. It is. But he got much better as he went along, and I think he was heavily influenced by like Alan Moore and stuff like that. So when I read Dr. Fate here in 1987, I feel like this is post Alan Moore Swamp Thing, you know, a little bit of Watchmen influence maybe. Like this really to me feels like a horror comic, especially when they go and they find Kent Nelson and he's got the mouth in his stomach and stuff like that. Like I love that stuff. And the relationship between the stepmother and the son and like the flashback to the father dying, it all just feels like it's very cinematic. And J.M. DeMatteis did go on to do also work for Vertigo, and he wrote for animation. So I think he actually is a very accomplished writer, and I think it shows here. As far as the art, I think it's weird because Keith Giffen's one of those guys I've always loved his art, but when I'm looking at it, it's so clear that is he purposely drawing the anatomy incorrectly? Is that just his style? I don't know. He's an incredible storyteller. But I've always been on the fence about his art. Josh, what do you think of his art?
I think it is intentional. I think that everything in his art is almost exaggerated, partially like abstract. I mean, even in the way that some of the times, like at the beginning when Dr. Fate is like transported into this other world and talking to this god, like how this god is never physically seen, but only in like the visuals behind him and in the word bubbles. Like it's so visually striking and beautiful. I think when it
or that panel right there, like that's intelligent.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Creative. It's unbelievable. I think when it does start to kind of fall apart is when it has to be more grounded, because you definitely do see the contrast of like something like this, where you can get these amazing bright colors and the helmet is exaggerated and it's amazing, and then when it needs to be real life, it feels a little bit strange, a little bit off. But I think for a comic like this, it works because of just the nature of this type of story. I kind of like that even the humans feel a little bit strange and off, like it feels otherworldly. But now, I enjoyed it.
Paul, I know you have to go. Is there anything, I think Josh and I are going to stay on for a few minutes more, but is there anything you wanted to say before we wrap up?
I think I can extend it by 5 minutes.
Okay.
Awesome.
That gives us 6 minutes.
Great. Okay. So we'll give you the floor. Go ahead.
I'd like to quickly say Keith Giffen had an attractive style on Legion of Superheroes. Then he became greatly influenced by a particular foreign artist whose name I don't remember. And he's changed his style radically, I think, to mimic the foreign artist. And it was okay. It was okay because it was so striking. I think that it works really well here with Dr. Fate. And I also think, like you said, Mark DeMatteis, he got better, definitely much better as time went by. Then the early stuff, left me cold. Another thing I'd like to throw in is that some people love horror. I don't.
Okay.
Horror for me is extremely boring. And so how can it become interesting? You remember with Marv Wolfman writing Tomb of Dracula.
Sure.
And Marv Wolfman said he didn't like horror at all. He had no interest in horror. Therefore, he had to write Tomb of Dracula really in a non-horror way. It was so character-based. All of those characters come to life. And so I love Tomb of Dracula, but I don't like horror. And on Doctor Strange, when Steve Englehart wrote Doctor Strange, it was about philosophy as much as anything else. Philosophy and an examination of Stephen Strange and Doctor Strange. It wasn't horror-based. And that's what I love too. But Mark DeMatteis is very much a horror writer, although it's not fair to say that about him regarding Silver Surfer, because I thought he did Silver Surfer very well. But I think the DeMatteis and Keith Giffen pairing is good. It's good, especially by this point in time in '87. Very good for Dr. Fate. And it got me much more interested in Dr. Fate than I had ever been interested before. And if I can say one last thing, and I know I'm jumping around here, but I'd also like to poll the two of you about something.
Sure.
We have Dr. Fate, we have Doctor Strange, we have Dr. Occult. Do you remember Dr. Occult?
He was featured on our first episode of Slam. Yep.
Okay, so which name do you strikes you best on a scale of A, B, C? A, most striking, C, least impressive.
Oh, I don't know.
These names.
Dr. Occult might be the coolest one, I think. I don't know. And then, I don't know. Objectively, Doctor Strange might be the weakest, and Doctor Fate might be the middle. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I would be the same. Maybe Doctor Fate more. I don't know. It's either Doctor Occult or Doctor Fate as number one. I think Doctor Strange is definitely the weakest.
So you see, people create these characters, like you said, Gardner Fox and late Steve Ditko and so on, and they say, okay, we're going to call him Doctor. Actually, I think it was Stan Lee that gave him the Doctor part. And so what will follow? Fate, Strange, Occult. I mean, these are not surprising names, but names affect you. Just like movie titles, they affect you. And Fate, that's a good name because, fate, what's going to happen, and history and future and everything. Occult, well, that's a little bit vague for me because we know what the occult means. So why would it be a little vague? Because it's just so broad. But then again, isn't Fate, that's broad as well. I like them all, but again, just to finish off my apparent contrariness in this podcast, my number one is Doctor Strange, because Strange immediately tells me strange. This is a reflection on the character. There's something strange here, something odd, something weird, something intriguing. And it's a typical Steve Ditko character, typical, to call this character Strange, because he loves all these kind of off-kilter names. So Dr. Fate, I like it. Dr. Occult, I like it. But I'm not as affected by those names as I am by Doctor Strange, because Doctor Strange tells me something about the character.
What about Dr. Destiny and Dr. Weird? Dr. Weird from the Aqua Teen Hunger Force, and Dr. Destiny from... Isn't he a DC villain? I think, right?
Well, there should be a comic that gathers all these doctors together. And the title of the story should be, Is There a Doctor in the House, or something.
There you go.
But since you asked me, and it is my last minute, Dr. Destiny, that's very conventional. It's okay, but that would be number 4 out of 4. And Dr. Weird, no, because Dr. Weird is too corny. Dr. Strange is intriguing. Dr. Weird that's too easy. Let's call it Dr. Weird. He's weird. No. Strange is intriguing. Strange in what way? Strange in a good way? Strange in a bad way? That's very intriguing. Weird is just weird.
All right. Okay, well, I think that wraps up Paul and our episode today. I believe you are scheduled to come back in 2 weeks for a Green Lantern, if you're free.
I better be free.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, I'll remind you about that, and you can confirm later. But anyway, for now, enjoy your night. I know you got to go.
Yep. Thank you. Bye, Michael. Bye, Josh.
Okay, thanks again for joining us. We'll talk later. Okay. So I guess the question is, Josh, of these 3 Dr. Fates, which one did you find the most fascinating?
I think I found the middle one the most fascinating. The 87 one was definitely intriguing, and I know it's a mini series, right? Like I think it's only 4 issues this run.
Yes, but then it continues into a regular for like another 24 issues.
Okay, gotcha. It's definitely intriguing. I feel like the middle one is more my like vibe, my flavor. I really like how it kind of balances it being grounded and still kind of like out there and strange and fantastical. Like it's both this like horror fantasy thing while also being a superhero comic, and I just absolutely love the art in it as well. So
I agree. That's my favorite. I mean, let's put it this way. That's the one that feels the most like Dr. Fate to me, like the classic Dr. Fate. The 87 one, I gotta say, if I were to go on to read more, it honestly be the 87 one. Even though it's not, it feels more like a weird horror comic. I find the characters and the treatment more slightly more intriguing. Less of a classic superhero and more of like a weird horror book. So
that's fair,
that's the one I think I would want to read more. Like, maybe not immediately, but I'm tempted to go on and read more because this whole premise sounds very interesting. Also, the fact that there's only this miniseries and then I think another 24 issues before this version of the character wraps up. I think it'd be pretty cool to go on and read more, so I probably will. But yeah, and then we should also point out that J.M. DeMatteis and Keith Giffen also teamed up to reboot the Justice League, which became Justice League International and America, with artist Kevin Maguire. They've been working together for decades now. So we also pointed out Keith Giffen also did the Legion of Superheroes in the early 80s. Then he rebooted Legion in the late 80s with Tom and Mary Bierbaum, I believe it's pronounced, and then later Chris Sprouse and some other people. So definitely two of the more talented creators at DC Comics at this time. We already talked about Walt Simonson. I think we're both big fans of his. If anyone gets a chance, you've got to check out this art by Walt Simonson in this Dr. Fate reboot. I did check ahead, and apparently there is a follow-up to that issue, but it's not in first issue special. It's in I can't remember what series it's in, but unfortunately it's not the same artist. It wasn't Walt Simonson, so I think that might be all we get from him on Dr. Fate. But yeah, he did a great job.
Yeah.
Now, just for the record, sometimes people ask, well, what about this Dr. Fate? What about that Dr. Fate? There are other versions. Like after this, Hector Hall took on the mantle of Dr. Fate. There was a reboot in the 90s. They renamed the character just Fate. Then I believe, was there another one in there? I'm not sure. But then in 2015, I believe Paul Levitz created the current version of Dr. Fate, which, again, we don't do research on the show, so I don't know what his name is. But he's finally the first, I believe he's Egyptian-American, or just Egyptian, but he's the first Egyptian ethnic character to be
That's
Dr.
awesome.
Fate, right? So yeah, it's really cool. And I'm a fan of Paul Levitz's writing, so I think I'm going to pick that up. I'm going to dig it up and check that out. So who knows? Or maybe we'll cover it in a future episode of Slam.
Yeah, that would be great.
So yeah. So there you go. So that wraps up our big Dr. Fate episode. We want to thank Paul for joining us. Paul's a busy guy, so we appreciate his time. We're definitely going to try and have him on again in the near future, possibly the very next episode. So be sure to join us for the next episode of Taped Crusaders, in which we review Flash Gordon. Be sure to join us for that.
Ooh, very exciting.
And if you're lucky, you'll see our Blue Beetle review if we can manage to get tickets. I don't know, man. This sucker might be sold out, but we'll do our best.
And that's if we can even talk about it.
That's true. Even if we do talk about it, you won't see it until the strike is over.
Right.
So there you go.
Okay.
Yep. And that's it, Josh. You can take it from here.
Yeah, thank you guys for listening to the podcast as well. You could find all of our stuff on our website at thecomicbooksyndicate.com. You can also find our podcasts and videos on YouTube and Facebook. I think from now on, we're going to try and make Slam a video podcast so we can have some of the stuff that we're talking about on screen, some of the panels. That way when we're talking about specific art, you, the audience, can kind of see exactly what we're talking about. So if you enjoy the podcast, you should go check it out over on our YouTube channel at the Comic Book Syndicate. And
or the website,
or on the website,
comicbooksyndicate.com, and then that'll lead you to the YouTube link anyway. But that way we get hits, and then we make millions of dollars, we become rich, then we retire and don't have to do this anymore, right?
Exactly. That's the goal of all this, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, leave us a review, drop us a comment, let us know what you guys think about the stuff we're talking about. Let's keep that comics conversation going, so keep in touch.
That's right. Until the next time. See you later.